This is Andrea Longton.
This is Leah Freemouth.
And this is Ebony Perkins. And we are Renegade Capital.
All views expressed in this podcast are our own. We are not financial planners, investment advisors, or tax advisors. The views that we have on this show do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the people who sign our paychecks. So please keep that in mind and always consult a trained financial professional before you start moving your hard-earned money. Let's dive in.
I'm toasting us with my new Renegade Capital travel mug. Check this out.
Oh, Leah, that looks beautiful. The lid comes off?
It does.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. It's like one level down from a Yeti. I'm confident of that.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, it's on our website. You can get it at our merch store. There's also really cool tote bags that I got one of those and a mug, and I accidentally left the tote bag at a neighbor's, so now they can carry it around to the grocery store. And
I like that. That's some guerrilla marketing right there. I'm just going to leave this bag for you right here.
Oh, and another cool thing, just because now I know that my friend Eva Rondo listens to our show. She's a pickleball friend, and I've known her since I've been playing pickleball. Just recently, she told me, she's like, Leah, I don't know if I've ever told you, but I've listened. I'm an avid Renegade Capital listener. And she has listened to every episode. And I said, oh my gosh, a new season came out. She said, I know. And I'm like, like, I had no idea that even like people that I mentioned it in passing, and she's been listening ever since. So shout out to Eva. She's a rock star.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. I also went back and went, oh, who have I said? Like, what have I said about things? Relative to our work and stuff.
Nah, it's all good.
Nothing I don't believe. So
I have exciting news to share.
Go on.
I know. I have a book launch party for The Social Justice Investor. It's happening. It's coming out. And my editor said, hey, it'd be really great if we could have the book launch party at a Wall Street investment firm. And I thought, that's cute. That'd be really cool to have that. I'm sure none of the investment firms have big issues with letting me come in and crash at their gates for any reason. And then I was talking to a friend who said, hey, silly goose. He didn't actually say those words. Those were just my words. But you have some friends who work in Wall Street investment firms, and you should ask them. And I did. And she said yes. And now we have people who are starting to RSVP yes at a book launch party in Wall Street. So if anybody is in the Wall Street area on April 23rd and would like to come to an amazing party celebrating a ton of leaders in the social justice investing space, you are very welcome to join us. And I will have more details at a future date. But it's happening, and that's super exciting.
Oh, congratulations.
That is so cool. Kudos to you.
Thank you. I feel like every day my editor or agent's like, it'd be great if you could do X. I'm like, absolutely. Tell me more about X. What does that mean? Because I don't know what that means yet. So then they tell me, I'm like, don't know how to do that. I'll go figure it out. So I have discovered along the way that I have a lot of really good friends who are willing to say yes. And how can we make this happen? And that has been one of the biggest blessings to come out of this is to I have some really amazing friends, including everybody on the screen right now. So thank you to everybody listening, because could not do this without every single one of you.
I'm blocking it off, so I can take a train up and, anything we can do to support you.
And here's my excellent segue for the evening. One of the contributing authors to the book, her name is Tanay Tatum-Edwards, and she is our guest tonight. And I asked her to write a piece for the book because she's doing some phenomenal work on social justice data for investments. And when I first asked her a few months ago if she would write for the book, I got to know her. She's amazing and may have said, and please also record an episode with us for Renegade Capital because she's doing such phenomenal work. She's on the cutting edge of how are we thinking about data for social justice investments in a really authentic, community-centered way, and going out and asking communities, what does social justice impact mean for you? What do you want to see in investments? How is this successful for you? And bringing that into a data set for investments. And she was just a couple weeks ago awarded $500,000 prize in order to go take it to the next level. And I'm hoping she's going to tell us a little bit more about it in this recording. But my understanding is she's taking that data to create an index for an exchange traded fund where the data about social justice, racial equity is going to come through this index and select companies to invest in based on those categories of success. So I'm super excited that she's joining us tonight. And my question for us is, if you think about your personal investments, not the investments that you do professionally, but your personal investments, what does success look like for you in terms of what impact your dollars are having on the ground? And that can be financial success, and it can also be, how do you think about success for social justice with your investments? Or have you even thought about that? Because it's okay if you haven't.
Well, making money, because it's retirement, it's, college funds for my son, etc. The way I have thought about it most recently, like last 6-7 years, as I've learned more about how money works and doesn't work for our communities, it's been intentional, and actually through the show, as we've met people like Fong and others, like making sure that my money's not going into like weapon manufacturers or the prison system, which, as I was reading more about our guest today, like just mass incarceration, and just that if I could go back and choose a career again, it would be to get into the criminal justice system for the youth and the juvenile system, because of what I know now. And it's just core to my being about fairness and equity. And so knowing that about how her data and our money can support or not support that type of investment is really important to me, and where I put my money. And it's been challenging because my funds, at least my retirement funds, are being managed by a broker, and he has us lumped in with his other clients, and we financially benefit from that. But I'm not sure his other clients are asking questions about where the money is going, because when I did ask about an ESG approach, I didn't get a lot of information. I'll just say it like that.
So I am an African American woman, and I was raised in the South. And I personally want my investments to go to support groups that are a part of that demographic. And so you don't have to necessarily be Black or a woman or raised in the South. So Southern culture is very important to me. That's a huge part of who I am. And to be honest with you, as far as like the impact investment world is concerned, I feel that the South is often forgotten and left out of these conversations. And so I would like to see my investments go to support the Southeast. I'd like for my investments to go to support, African American groups that need the support, who may not receive the same opportunities as others. And I think I want my investments to support women and girls. That's really important to me. But at the same time, with my investments, I want to be really clear, which is why I'm really excited about this particular episode. There is a lot of greenwashing in this industry and in this space. There are people saying that they're helping certain groups and they're not. And so I think that there is a real opportunity for us to put the numbers where we talk. I really want to see with my investments, I really want to see impact reports. I don't want to just see returns. I want to see the faces. I want to hear the stories of the people that are being impacted by this. That's really important to me.
When it comes to greenwashing and impact reports, what do you look for in impact reports to make you feel comfortable that they aren't being greenwashed or impact washed, but they are authentic?
To be honest with you, I look just for a report. I know that's small, but there are so many people who don't even do a freaking report. Like, yeah, your money's going here and we're going to call it a day. I look for stories. I look for percentages. A lot of times, depending on the investment, they talk about their impact numbers. We helped this number of low income groups, or we helped whatever, this number of women, as a percentage of our entire portfolio. The investments that are comfortable sharing that information, if I can see a previous report that they did, before I invested in them, that makes me feel a lot more comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm likely to have a larger investment. But that data is just a storytelling tool, and the stories matter to me.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm the only one that really thinks about that.
And I am super excited then to start talking about our guest even more, and her role in this, which is how do we bring social justice data into investments? So how do we start to merge those two pieces that we're talking about, the dollar side and an authentic community-centric impact side together, and package it in a way that's easy for people to identify, connect with, and invest in.
This is Leah Freemau.
This is Ebony Perkins.
This is Andrea Longton. We are Renegade Capital, and today we're talking about social justice data for investments. Renegade Capital Podcast is proud to be sponsored by U.S. Bancorp Impact Finance, a subsidiary of U.S. Bank, which is an industry leader in providing financial solutions that help create positive impact for communities and the environment. For 35 years, its tax credit investments and syndications, lending, and other financial solutions have helped create affordable housing, spur economic activity in underserved communities, restore historic buildings, develop renewable sources of energy, and strengthen community development financial institutions, or CDFIs, nationwide. Learn more at usbank.com/impactfinance. We are so excited to have Tanay Tatum-Edwards join us on Renegade Capital today. Tanay founded FreeCap Financial in 2019 as a research company that provides investors and money managers with intelligent, social justice-oriented data to equip individuals and collectives with the tools they need to enact positive change in this world. FreeCap captures information from a wide variety of sources and translates it into investable insights for financial advisors, asset managers, and institutional investors so that they can more easily align their portfolios with their clients' values. Tanay, welcome to Renegade Capital. We're so glad you joined us. And by way of introduction, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to launch FreeCap Financial?
As you mentioned, FreeCap is a data provider focused on social justice investing, the S in ESG. It started by going to conferences. My background's in the asset management space. So I was on the investor relations team, and within that, I was working in impact measurement. And I would go to these conferences and hear people talk about racial equity, racial justice investing, what we can be doing in the market. And when it came time to discuss what products and innovations people could actually invest in, the room was often silent. Often in those spaces, I was often like one of few women of color specifically, often the only Black woman in those rooms. And so after experiencing that over and over again, I just realized, okay, if it's not like someone like me is going to have to do it. And there are so few of us that this might be my calling to work on specifically. So with FreeCap, we provide the information that helps people assess what racial equity practices companies are actually implementing and how effective they are, so that you can incorporate that into your investment strategies. And we license that to asset managers specifically who are building investment products. I started working with the criminal justice space initially because both me and other members of our team have loved ones who are directly impacted by incarceration. And it was a problem where there was clearly market incentives that drive the prison industrial complex, that also drive mass incarceration rates. But I was working in an industry where people weren't seeing the connection between mass incarceration, racial equity, and the rural capital markets playing in it. we saw that as an opportunity to where to start. So our flagship data set does look at the criminal justice space and benchmarks how companies impact mass incarceration.
Can you help us understand whenever you are looking at data sets and then how to create investment products that people can invest in? How do you match that up? How does that work?
That's a great question. It's a very complicated question. So maybe what will be helpful is to walk you through our process, how we got to the criminal justice scorecard. We worked with a group of graduate students to look at all the different ways that companies interact with the prison system. So through their labor policies, through their vending contracts, like when people are coming home from prison, like what are all the different ways we can look at that? And we came up with a list of 40 metrics, which is not a realistic number to gather for an initial scorecard assessment. And so we then went and did a data survey to see, okay, of these 40 metrics, where can we reliably continue to find consistent data? And is that data like reliable, consistent? We can find it across like thousands of equities and is impactful. And so from that 40, we came up with a list of 8 that met those criteria. And from there, to create an overall score for companies, we assigned values to what we thought were most important, and weight those metrics more than the other metrics. And that was the process. We worked with people who were directly impacted as well. So particularly the Georgetown Pivot Program was incredibly helpful in working with fellows through there in helping us understand what issue areas was most important to measure and to value more. And so, for example, when I first started this work, the investment community was aware of prison labor and aware of private prisons. And so there was a lot of movement happening in the space back in 2019, 2020 around those issues. But when I talk to people who are coming home from prison or who have been formerly incarcerated, if you ask them their main issue, really, often people don't say prison labor first. What consistently came up was most of us will come home and we need jobs, and all these companies are in places to hire us. And so those conversations, honestly, is why we moved our methodology to be so much more focused on the like fair chance hiring and second chance hiring. And we still do incorporate prison labor and vending contracts into what we're assessing from a risk perspective for investors, but from an impact perspective and how we're thinking about this and being values in line with people who are just as involved, that shaped how we did the final scorecard.
Speaking for myself, I don't think we understand the vast touches that the prison system has in our day-to-day life. So maybe a couple examples of where we might be buying something that we don't know is made through that system, or or an entity that, again, we shop at might also be generating a lot of income by selling things to a prison, or public or private. So just help us understand the kind of big reach this thing has. And then on the other side, it's with this data as an investor, or what are we doing with that information? And like, is it with just our finances and kind of investments, or are there other things?
So let me start with the first question, the big picture. There's a whole network of companies that have a direct financial incentive to keep people behind bars. And the ones that we know are like the most obvious ones are private prison companies. So private prisons make money based on the number of people who are incarcerated in those cells. And so they actively lobby for sentencing policies at the state and federal level that will increase the amount of people who are going to prison. And so if you think about when there was a lot of media attention around families being separated at the border, the decision to separate families from each other means that you have to have a cell for the parents and a cell for the kids in different facilities, which increases the bottom line of those companies. And so there was active lobbying by those private prison companies for that policy to be in place. Another example is in the vending space. So all of these prisons, they have the fundamental pieces that need to be in place in order for them to operate. So electricity, the population there needs food services, the population there also needs healthcare. And there are companies that engage in anti-competitive behavior because they have a captive audience and they actively market to prisons. And so as prison populations increase, their bottom line increases. And so right now we spend $182 billion a year on incarceration in the U.S. We have less than, I think, 3% of the global population, or around 3% of the global population in the U.S., and we have 20% of its incarcerated population. And so just to give you a sense of how large this problem is, and it's a uniquely, in terms of countries with as much economic, like the economic GDP per capita in the U.S., we're unique in how much we incarcerate people and the fact that it's privatized. And we make so much money off of it. So an example that comes to mind, one of the data sets that we publish is we gather data from 33 states and aggregate the individual transactions between companies who are publicly traded and how much money they've made from vending contracts with the corrections department. Because we were able to aggregate it from different states, we discovered that Cardinal Health has made over $1 billion in vending contracts from the past, I think it was 2 or 3 years. And so yeah, that's one example on the why it's a problem side. It's just that it's, as long as incarceration remains profitable, there will always be incentives to lock people behind bars. And so right now, the way our capital markets are set up is to incentivize incarceration and to make money off of it, as opposed to decarceration.
3% of the global population, but we hold in the U.S. 20% of the incarcerated population
Of the world's incarcerated population
globally.
Mm-hmm.
Whew, that was a deep breath moment. So we're gonna ask you to brag on yourself a little bit here, because we heard that you recently won the Justice Innovation Prize. That will help turn FreeCap's data into an index and an ETF. Can you share a little bit more about what the prize looks like, and what it's going to enable you to do and what your vision is for it?
Yeah, so that was very exciting. We were part of, so Dream.org put out a call for people who are doing innovations within the justice space, looking for either capital market solutions, technology solutions. There were, I think, about 100 people who applied. We were one of 5 finalists, and we ended up winning the competition along with 2 other winners. And so,
congratulations!
Thank you. So yeah, so we received $300,000 to create the Decarceration Fund. And for context, creating this fund is the reason I quit my job back in 2019. I wanted to create an ETF where no matter who you are, where you invest, how much money you have, you can invest in decarceration. Having an index will make decarceration and prison risk a material financial metric that we track in the market, and that we can start to price in to capital. And so we don't currently price in externalities properly and the harm that companies are doing. And so this is a way that I envision we could price in prison risk, and the cost that it has to society. And when I presented this idea in 2019, people thought I was crazy, or they were like, "That's really sweet, that's cute, good luck with that." And when I went to try to create the fund, the data there wasn't enough data or the data quality to have a viable product. And so that led me to becoming a data provider so that we can get the data to create the product. So all this to say, winning the prize feels incredibly full circle, because it's been a 4-year journey to get to having a decarceration fund that's available in the public market space, so that we can have true impact within the public equity space.
First, congratulations. That is unbelievably huge, to have that vision to come full circle and to get the funding for it through such an incredible opportunity and to be selected because it's just huge. Can you walk our listeners through what is an ETF? What is a decarceration fund, and how are you thinking about that?
Well, an exchange traded fund is a pool of assets. A pool of stocks. So instead of investing in Tesla individually or Amazon individually or say any company and buying their individual stocks, you can buy them as a pool through a fund structure. And so typically, like a lot of people in their retirement accounts would have mutual funds back in the day. Exchange traded funds became more popular over the past decade because they brought the cost of funds down, and it's incredibly transparent, like which companies you're invested in and why. What we like about having an index is that it makes it clear what criteria we're using to select companies in the fund and why they're there. So with a decarceration fund, we're taking the criminal justice scorecard that looks at how companies impact mass incarceration, and we're looking at companies who are the best at hiring people who are formerly incarcerated, so leaders in fair chance hiring, while also reducing their prison exposure. Those are the highest rating companies in FreeCap scorecard. So those are the ones that will make up the ETF. And so people who are invested in this ETF can be invested in companies who are at the forefront of decarceration because they both are defunding the prison industrial complex, as well as making sure people who are formerly incarcerated have access to jobs and reducing recidivism.
Can I put it in different terms to help me visualize it and understand it? So an ETF is like a basket of stocks where an investor is able to select an ETF that, in this case, matches something that they're really that they want to invest in, which is decarceration. And you've created an index to help screen these different companies to say this one, if you invest in this company, then that will be supportive to decarceration. And we're not going to put in companies into the basket that don't pass this index because they contribute to increased incarceration.
That's right. Yes. And I'm happy this is recorded because I can write that down afterwards.
I understand the concept of the investments that we're talking about and the ETF, like the decarceration entities. And like where I go with that maybe is more on like advocacy and policy work. And like, that's just my background and kind of like, I understand not investing and not putting money there, but then am I turning and then putting money into things that are actively going like trying to dismantle that system? Or is it just that they just don't interact with that system in a way that is perpetuating it? So like the decarceration, like there's a very active, like we're breaking the system, we want it gone. And then there's we're just not going to spend our money in that way. Is there like, where is it both?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So two things. The first is that I truly believe that mass incarceration is an all hands on deck problem. And so this solution is not going to end mass incarceration. It will work alongside advocacy and policy changes and grassroots movements. I do strongly believe that there has to be a capital market, some type of intervention here, because right now, the way we've set it up, prisons is a profit model as opposed to something that's costly for businesses. We have to create a way for that cycle to change, and this innovation disrupts that. And so by disrupting the capital that drives the prison industrial complex, the advocacy folks can not have to deal with the lobbying for incarceration and like have more space to actually for their work to be successful. Because as long as there's money driving it, there's a ceiling to what we can do on the advocacy side. The second piece around your question of how much truly decarceration versus just like not investing in terrible people, there is no Fortune 100 company, S&P 500 company that is, I would say, you are a leader in decarceration. Like, we're not there yet. We would love to get there. And I think the first one of the first steps to getting there is creating standards and knowing where everyone stands currently compared to each other. And so having an index and having a fund means that companies who are included in it are better than the companies who are excluded. And so we don't always have to name like who's a bad actor. Sometimes being able to give people a pathway to being a good actor is a way to create a race to the top. And that's the vision that we see, being able to say, okay, look, if you actually like start like, because our scoring rubric is essentially a set of best practices, right? Like you should have an auditing process for prison labor in your supply chain. You should have an active recruitment program for people who are formerly incarcerated. You can make sure, in addition to banning the box, make sure that background checks aren't done until the very end of a process, and even at that point, it's only relevant to the job function. And so by having an index, you make it clear to companies what they should be doing. And in that sense, there's a level of transparency. And then the third piece that's really great about this strategy is that you have investors who are owners of the company holding the companies accountable. And so a lot of the advocacy work that we think about is from the consumer side, but we're consumers of these businesses, and if we own stocks, we're owners of them too. And so how do we leverage both sides to shape what they're doing? Okay.
Can you expand a little bit more just on what you were just saying on people are consumers and also investors, and that I'm putting words in your mouth. We vote with our dollars in many ways. What is something that our audience can do in order to support you and also to support a decarceration movement?
There are a few things. Anyone that has a 401k can ask their provider about their ESG strategy and what options exist. ESG is, I don't want to say a bare minimum, but right now there's a growing movement to try to make public equities more impactful. And so I'm not a financial advisor, but from my experience trying to structure my own portfolio, there aren't enough truly impactful public equities funds on the market to structure like a balanced portfolio for my risk tolerance. But there are enough ESG products mixed with some great impact-driven products that are out there to get there. And we're working on like getting more funds like Decarceration out the door will be able to help us get to a space where we can have a full portfolio of these like public equities type of investing strategies. To help us, joining the waitlist for the free index and staying up to date would be huge. And that's at freecapfinancial.com. Asking the folks who manage your 401k what they're doing around decarceration is helpful in how they're thinking about social equity within the ESG space, because they don't get pushed on those questions. That will start getting them on the thinking about it and creating a market for what we're doing. And then the last piece is how, especially if you work at a public company, but any company really, like how would you score on our criminal justice scorecard? How are you benchmarking yourself in relationship to this? Because what we're doing is making it making it actually costly to not engage in these behaviors, because we're selling the data to asset managers who are going to hit your like score basically based on this issue. And so making sure that you had those internal processes in place, and working with someone or talking to us about what you could do or getting your company benchmarked, it's also like a way that we could work together.
Everything you just said just really underscores how important this index is, to be able to have something that you can measure. Because to manage something, you have to measure it, and to have an index of, yes, decarceration is important, but if you were to ask your 401k advisor, well, how do we even measure that? Well, here, this index can help you to start moving that along. So thank you very much for thinking that through and going full circle and being willing to be brave in that space where what I mentioned earlier when you said, oh, that's cute and that's sweet. Okay, go about your day, is like when someone pats you on the head and like pushes you out the door. And for this to come full circle and to get this huge prize is just so extraordinary.
Renegade Capital Podcast is proud to be sponsored by Self-Help Credit Union and Self-Help Federal Credit Union, which believe in the power of finance to transform lives and communities. Are you an impact investor looking to make a difference? Look no further than Self-Help, where your deposits can create positive change. Don't just invest for profit, invest for impact. Visit selfhelp.org/invest-for-impact today and start depositing into a money market or term certificate with Self-Help Credit Union, where your money can change lives. Self-Help Credit Union, ownership and economic opportunity for all.
So, Tanay, I have two questions, and I'm going to let you answer each of them separately. So, the first one is, why should people care about decarceration? And I don't mean to be so crass when I ask that, but the reality is, our society has out of sight, out of mind mentality, right? And so they intentionally put people that they don't want in society behind bars. And so if they aren't here, we intentionally forget about them.
I'm going to first talk about my faith as a Southern Christian woman. I believe that the cross is where the people who are most vulnerable are in our society. And when I look at the U.S. and the way we treat people who are incarcerated, the way we treat children who are in poverty, the way we treat recent immigrants to this country, if you are someone who truly believes you're a Christian, you need to be working as close to the cross as possible, and the cross lies with those people. So from my faith perspective, I don't actually think I can. I think not caring is inconsistent with my faith. So I don't. I know that might speak to some people. I know other people are like, wow, I don't know, And the incarceration is a uniquely American problem in how pervasive it is. And so I want to say I'm quoting this right. Please correct me in the notes if I'm wrong. But 1 in 3 Americans, adults, have a record, whether it's a misdemeanor or felony. And so every single time you apply for a job, you have to explain that to someone. And everyone knows at least one person. With those type of statistics, one person, whether it's your uncle who got caught with some IRS fraud stuff, or if it was your brother who was selling drugs. It's a whole spectrum of what incarceration looks like in this country. Black and brown people are disproportionately incarcerated as a percentage of the population for things that are legal in a lot of other places, are currently legal, are becoming legal, and something I always say too is if you think back to what you did on your worst day. If there was a police present, would you be in prison today? It's probably yes, if we're being honest with ourselves, because the threshold for what is a crime in this country is so low. So yeah, so I guess that's how I would think about it. It could be you, it could be your family, and it likely is already because of just how pervasive it is in this country.
Thank you. And then my second question is that I often think and recognize that sometimes what data shows that a community needs and is a priority is often very different from what the actual community may say is a priority and what they need. As a data professional who I personally think is has your thumb on the pulse of local communities, how do you personally reconcile that? Those two things that may be, really different from each other.
I have to have advisors who I trust, and then trust my instincts as the person who's doing this from the capital markets approach to justice reform. And within my space, there are a lot of really amazing justice involved people who are leading companies that in some ways are it's not like abolishing or eliminating the system, but it's making it better and more humane as a current solution. And so sometimes I like that's often the feedback that I get. I wouldn't say often. There's a crew of people who are like, oh yeah, this system needs to exist. And then there's a crew of people who are like, oh, she's so idealistic. Like what we actually like, we don't need. What we need right now is like better ways to manage parole, like not an abolition of parole. And when you have someone who's like formerly incarcerated or currently incarcerated telling you that, you have to take that seriously. And I also appreciate that there are a few people who can look at the work through my lens because they haven't walked through my steps through the asset management, through the finance space, and have to trust that my approach is one of many approaches that are working alongside other approaches. But know that like my expertise has value in the lane that I'm existing in. And I try to be honest about my lane to people and not overstep it. Like if I were to, that's not a good example, but there are all these people who are like, oh yeah, I'm an expert in crypto, and now they're experts in AI, and they just retrain themselves to be whatever's hip. Like that's not me. Like I'm the lady that does impact metrics within the financial space, trying to reform the way capital markets works, and doing justice work. I'm not stepping out of my lane.
So Tanay, I'm going to ask why data? Because I really appreciated the quote about FreeCap from Tony McCreight of National League of Cities, which said, utilizing economic tools has always been part of the movement for justice. In the past, communities organized boycotts and sit-ins as a pathway for change. Taking ownership over our investments is a new tool to add to our toolkit. FreeCap's scorecard is a necessary leap, in that direction. So Tanay, why choose investment data as your professional tool for social justice and racial equity?
The markets are constantly taking in information to decide how much a company is worth. And right now, the type of information that properly reflects how these companies impact people of color, our planet, like racial equity issues, is currently under provided to the market. And so in order for us to get to a point where these issues that we care about are truly being priced into the way we value a company. So a company even thinking of private prisons as an example, they make money by incarcerating people, but those incarcerated people are a loss of productivity to the economy. There's been like a ripple effect of poverty because if those people have children, and these are all societal costs that don't get baked into the product that the company is offering. And so we have to find a way to make sure that those things get priced into and not just a superficial top line in like the immediate profit. So right now we don't properly price in externalities. I also firmly believe that you measure what you value. And so if we value these things, we have to measure them and we have to be able to benchmark companies. When I first started, there was some nonprofits doing really innovative work in this space. When you look at the list, they were often kind of like an investigative journalist. So they would be able to find information about a company and go deep dive. And you're like, okay, well now we know this about this one company, we can divest from them. But it's not enough. But you can't really build a strategy unless you know exactly how Walmart compares to Amazon, compares to Target. And so how do you standardize that so that we know, okay, like we know that Walmart had prison labor in their supply chain in the past, but what about Target and Amazon? Because it does not make a difference if you divest from Walmart if their competitors are doing the same thing. And to be fair to Walmart, they are doing really great work on fair chance hiring recently. So I don't want them to just be our negative case study because they're actually doing some cool stuff.
On that last point, Tanay, though, do you think is Walmart doing that because the light was shown on their practices and their connection?
I can't speak for Walmart specifically. I know Starbucks had prison labor in their supply chain, and every single time the prison labor a prison labor article comes up, Starbucks gets quoted, and they have to put out a press release saying we no longer have prison labor in our supply chain. We ended this practice, and they actually have some of the strongest anti-prison labor policies of companies. And so they spend a lot of money marketing and communicating like this thing that they did in the early 2000s. For Walmart's case, my guess is that it actually has to do more with the fact that there is a labor shortage in the U.S. market, and they have to find a way to hire people who are formerly incarcerated if they're going to be able to keep their doors open, because there's not enough labor for the jobs that we have right now.
But last question that we always ask everyone is, how do you define a renegade?
Every time I hear that word, I think of the Jay-Z and Eminem song. I have a hard time not thinking of that song because it's one of Eminem's greatest verses, in my opinion. So renegade is never being afraid to say what's on your mind at any given time and day, right? That's the line. I'm a renegade. So yeah, that's what I think about, is people are able to be outspoken and speak their truth, no matter the circumstances.
You think we can get the music rights to that song and have it like fade out over her?
Absolutely. It won't cost all of our budget for 3 seasons. That was incredible. She's doing such cool things, even between asking her if she would join us to now, like, has made so much progress.
So in addition to the index, they're setting up an ETF?
So to set up an ETF, you have to have an index, especially for like a thematic index like this. And so the ETF is like the financial structuring behind the index. And the index has all of the methodology of how they choose which investments to pull in. ETFs are a really cool way and effective way, in my opinion, to be able to invest in what you want to be investing in, and to have someone who knows what they're doing to look through an index. Because indexes are a ton of work to put together, and the methodology and all of the compliance you have to go into in order to get a product out in the public capital markets.
When you say product, it's the fund is the product?
Yeah. So it's an ETF, an exchange traded fund. Like, you can, if it's publicly traded, you can go and purchase an ETF through like a DIY investment portfolio. Potentially, if your 401k offers it, through the 401k. Or if you work with a financial advisor, you can call them and say, I want to buy a share of this ETF. Ebony, what did you think?
I appreciate the work that she's doing around decarceration and bringing attention to it. Kind of like I mentioned before, I think that is a population that many in society couldn't care less about. And we often forget that they are humans and they are people. And the reality is many are actually not guilty of the crimes that they are sentenced for. And some who may have committed a small infraction are sentenced for something much larger. And so it's not a fair system, and we shouldn't lose sight of our people. And so I like that she is not only bringing attention to it, but she's also working to find a solution to address the problem. I'm seeing a lot more attention given to criminal justice and the system on the national level. I'm seeing a lot of celebrities use their voice for it, but it's more so like free whoever. It's not like, okay, how can we address the systemic issue from the jump? And she is coming at this problem from a whole different angle. And she's using a very creative solution that's also based in some sort of traditional finances, so that so she can still reach the average person. I shouldn't say the average person, so she can still reach the finance bros. And I respect that. She gets me thinking. So yeah, good one.
I didn't bring it up during the interview, but when she was talking about our connections, direct connections personally to people that have been incarcerated or returning citizens. And personally and statistically speaking, not me, white, middle class woman from West Virginia. I mean, like I have the privilege of sitting in the space where this doesn't impact me at all, in some form or fashion, like from a personal level. And I just don't want to not flag that. Like those of us that sit in a position of privilege are not part of the statistics and the mass incarceration. I mean, the mass incarceration is not happening to white men. It's happening to Black and brown men. It has been for decades, lost generations. And it's so significant. And just to say that in a very direct way, that, we have a responsibility to know that and to do something about it in some form or fashion. And if there is a way to invest and it's, moving your money in different ways, that's great. There's organizations in Virginia like the Fountain Fund where they focus on returning citizens for job training and stuff, but they also do small loans. And I hadn't thought about this, but in the sense that like court fees and things can pile up. And so when you can't get your driver's license in Virginia if you still have unpaid court fees. And so loans of $300, $400, $500 to pay your court fees, so then you can get your driver's license, so you can actually get to the work. So I mean, there are even small ways. I think we're learning a lot about that this season, like with the financial violence and economic violence, that episode, and it's just so powerful how these small things can really kind of have a ripple effect.
I actually have an opposite view, and this also, like, everything is very personal, right? And so we all have, like, we think about things based on how they've impacted our lives. But I do have several people in my life who have been convicted of felonies, and have seen how disruptive they are, and they're white people who have, and like how they can really destroy families and destroy family dynamics for generations. And it's been something that I've struggled with for like a really long time, is how I feel about it on a political and financial point of view whenever we talk about things like decarceration, because it hits very close to home for me. And so it's something I've struggled with for a long time. And to me, it goes back to your point, Leah, of who is most impacted by this, and who is disproportionately impacted by this, and having to like get beyond my own experiences and think about it from that systemic level, Ebony, that you were talking about too. But I think this gets really personal for a lot of people because so many people, it is so pervasive, and people have different experiences to it. I mean, I think it's one of those hard things for every person to work through emotionally, and have to think about at that systemic level of what are we trying to do with our dollars, even beyond our own individualism, and thinking about our community as a whole, not our local community, not our people who look like us, but our entire, if I think about a U.S. perspective, about our entire country, and how the people within our country are able to work and live and to reach their full potential.
Well, and you said local community, which was another thing that I didn't know how to articulate, or I didn't bring it up in the interview, in that in a lot of rural areas, prisons are the only jobs. And so, and when I like the Cardinal healthcare and like all of that, like, yes, 100%, like tear that shit down, right? The non-competitive practices, like, but I'm thinking about even here locally in the city of Richmond, we got a local pharmacist who her way to sustain the pharmacy is to actually get into distribution of her generic supplies to centers, correctional centers, veterans hospitals, where she can kind of package up the drugs and sell to these local facilities. She's a local business owner. I mean, you look at Southwest Virginia, there's maximum security prison. Moundsville in West Virginia, relative to Morgantown, Moundsville picked the prison because in the 1800s, because it was jobs. Morgantown picked the university. So like at the local economy level, sometimes it's like the only thing they have, as far as what's feeding their kids.
So how do we wrap up this post-interview section?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, I don't even know what my point was, other than it's just so fucking complicated.
It is, though. It is really complicated. And to me personally, it boils down to what's the world I want to live in? And how do we get the tools and resources to get us there? Because we do live in a society where money and capital markets drive what we do. And that's why I was so excited to meet Tanay and to talk to her and learn about what she's doing, because she's creating a tool to benchmark and to have some kind of measuring stick to say, this is the direction we want to be going. How are you measuring up against this? And just that tool didn't exist before. Like that tool literally didn't exist before, and she's creating it and giving us tools to be able to finance the world in which we want to live. And that is incredible to me.
This is what Renegade Capital is all about. Yes, we try to provide some tools and tips, but we also ask some really big questions. And more than anything, we want our audience to walk away with some of those thought-provoking questions so they can start thinking about how they can draft some solutions too. So thanks, Andrea. Brought us some good questions. Now it's time for our folks to go out and think about some answers.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Renegade Capital. If you like what you heard, you can listen to previous episodes on your favorite podcast platform, and be sure to follow us on social media at Renegade Capital, or check out our website, www.renegadecapitalpodcast.com, to never miss a new release. Our show is hosted by Andrea Longton, Ebony Perkins, and Leah Freemount, publicized by Elizabeth Gilbert Ketzel of Narrator Studios, and produced by yours truly, Chance Lee.